Hello, everyone. I'm happy to welcome Peter Boot. Most of you probably already know it, but just a word that he's a senior researcher in Huygens Institute in Amsterdam and has carried on a very thorough evaluation of the TEI processing model as is, and also as is defined in the TEI guidelines, but also with the extensions that TEI publisher has for the TEI processing model, and will tell us what he thinks about it. So as I mentioned, the meeting is recorded. The recording has been started. So Peter, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I'll start sharing my screen. Okay, that's nice. Yes, thank you, Magdalena, and others for inviting me. Thanks to all the others for being here and for coming to listen to my talk. Yes, I gave a talk about some aspects of the TEI processing model at Declarative Amsterdam in November, and Magdalena was quick to notice that. And she suggested I present my ideas to you. I think that's a really good idea. People at Declarative Amsterdam were also interested, but of course they know much less than you know about the TEI processing model because you're using this every day. I'm going to propose a number of extensions to the TEI processing model, and eventually this may result in issues in GitHub or a proposal to the TEI Council. But I like very much to be discussing it with you because it's for me also something that is work in progress. So I appreciate feedback very much in this meeting or even if it comes afterward in a mail or whatever. I'll be very grateful for that. First of all, what I want to say is that it's not a criticism of the processing model or the way it is used in TEI Publisher. It's really on the contrary. I think the processing model is really very useful. It's something that, should have been around a long time ago, and it has changed the TEI publication landscape enormously. And I think with some modifications, it can become even more useful. So what are we going to discuss? First of all, the background. How did I get to this? My idea is that we should try, or at least I want to try, to get at a fully declarative specification of edition output. The processing model can play an important role in that. Then we'll look at the possibilities of having nested models in the processing model. I want to propose to lift the processing model definitions for elements out of the schema definition. I want to propose to create something like reusable modules or code blocks, or how you want to call them, of processing model definitions. I want to propose a way of going from one auth into another during the processing in order to help create some reusable independent components. I want to propose to override model definitions, not at the model level, but at the model level, rather than at the element specification level, as is being done now. And then I'll give a very, very brief demo just to show that this can actually be gotten to work, but that's not meant to be something really useful. It's really only a proof of concept. And the talk assumes some knowledge of the TEI processing model and the way you're using that in TEI Publisher. That's actually the whole idea of the talk. So, declarative specification of edition output. The first thing that we learn when we start text encoding is that we do not want to encode how the text looks or how we want the text to look. What we encode is the structure of the text or functionalities of components of the text. What we encode may be our research interest, but not the way it is supposed to look. When we have done that, that leaves us with the need for software, of course, to get to the next stage, to the stage of publication. But software, as we know, is expensive. We don't often have the money to build software. It's often built. It's often custom built, really, for the needs of a single edition. Seen from the editorial perspective, it's not our core competence. Many people acquire some knowledge of software, but it's not what we set out to do. And what is always a problem with software is that it eventually is no longer supported and dies. And then, of course, your edition is also no longer visible. I want to suggest that writing software that directly reads the edition XML and outputs an edition, which is still often the practice in many projects, can be considered as similar to creating a scholarly edition in Word. I think we all have colleagues who said to us, okay, look, here I have my edition and it's in Word, and there are white lines between the stanzas and the titles are in bold, and it's very nice. But of course, when you try to lift it out of Word, it's really a problem. It's the result of not having thoroughly analyzed the editorial. No, you can't say it. They may have thoroughly analyzed the editorial phenomena that they wanted to edit, but not sufficiently in a not sufficiently abstract manner. It's been encoded immediately into the way it should look, rather than in these neutral terms, abstract terms that we think we should use. When you write software immediately to the XML rather than to a specification of what the edition should look like, in a sense, all of your knowledge of the edition is embedded within the software. And of course, then when the software dies, the knowledge of your edition is also gone. So what we should really have, I think, is a complete analysis of the functionality that editions can have, and based on that, the possibility to completely specify the functionality of a certain edition. So the content, how elements are represented, the user interface, search facets, etc., etc. And the software should implement that specification and really nothing else. That may be too extreme desire, but I think as a purpose, this is how it should be. Maybe not reachable, but we should strive for that. And if it should be possible, the knowledge of what the edition should be doesn't disappear with the software. One implementation of such a model could run many different editions, and editors would no longer need money in order to employ programmers. Rather, they could write those specifications if we manage to keep them simple enough, and the implementation would run their edition as is. And in fact, of course, you, the TEI Editiones group, are to some extent already working and making this a reality. The TEI Processing Model helps define how XML elements should be represented in an edition. The HTML templates in TEI Publisher define the layout and the constituents of web pages, and are also a form of specifying what the edition should be. And from a slightly different perspective, there have also been attempts in Berlin in the Ediarum group to create manifests that are actually a component of runnable software. So I think this is an idea which is, well, I'm not alone in that. I think it's something that is generally accepted, that it can be useful. So when my manager said some time ago, you've been with us for a long time, and your retirement is coming near. Is there anything that you want to do in the coming years, except for all of the other things that have to be done? I said, yes, one thing that I'd like to do is try to find out how far we could get with this fully declarative specification of edition output. And so that's the reason why I started looking at the TEI processing model, which I had already looked at in other contexts, of course. I think that the ideas that I'm going to present are still useful even without this idea of a fully declarative specification of edition output. But we'll see. The first thing that I want to discuss is a limitation that I encountered, that I often wanted to attach multiple behaviors to a single element, and then not multiple behaviors executed sequentially, because of course we can do that using the model sequence, but multiple behaviors that are nested. And as an example, I want to look at this very simple piece of XML, a list annotation element containing node elements. And in my edition, I want this to be turned into a section, and the section should have a heading nodes, and then the nodes, and of course the HTML here is simplified for the example. So how could we do this? Using existing behaviors, and I'm a bit surprised that this is white. Using existing behaviors, well, the code that should be here is a model sequence, and then within the model sequence, model behavior heading, and then as content of the heading, there would be a text literal, and then a block that would contain the nodes. But the effect of this is that the heading and the block of nodes are not contained within a single element. And then, for instance, if you want to position that content or turn display on and off in CSS, that would be a problem. The TEI publisher solution is here on the right. This is the PB template element. And of course, when you know some HTML, this is really handy. Just a few HTML elements, and these are the content is instantiated using the variables and then placed within a section. Then we do have this container element, this section that contains both the header and the heading and the nodes, but it's really a fallback to the target language, which I think we should try to avoid. I think when we say we want to formulate the behavior of elements in the TEI processing model, we should strive to keep within that level and not fall back to the target language. Then this is really weird. I'm sorry. I'm going to stop my slideshow and start it again, see whether the information on the slide comes back. Just a minute. I have an idea what might be wrong. Just a minute again. I want to remove the animation. There shouldn't be animation. Shouldn't be any animation. Remove, and then on the other slide. Remove. I certainly don't hope that this is on all of the slides. Okay. So now we're seeing the correct information. If you're not seeing that, someone please shout. The next solution, if we say we don't want to fall back to the target language, we could define a new behavior, such as section with heading. And then the section with heading could just contain the heading and then the notes as we wish it. However, then we have a new behavior which needs implementation, and someone will have to implement that, or we'll need an implementation that accepts users creating new implementations. It also has the effect of causing proliferation of behaviors. We already have the section with heading, the section and the heading. Now we get the section with heading. Do we don't also want a block with heading, and we then want a block with a label? So things that already work might also work together without having to define new behaviors. So the solution that I want to suggest is to do nesting. That's what we see here on the right. Let me get my pointer back. What we see here on the right. At the list annotation level, we define behavior section. Then within the model, we have a model sequence. And within the model sequence, we have our heading and we have our block. And here in the block are where the nodes are coming. And to me, this seems like the obvious solution, or rather, it seemed to me while I was preparing this talk, I thought this is really a more a simple version of what is a more general solution. And the general solution would be to have model as a child of parameter. Because when I have the, let's go back to there first. When I have the model sequence within the model, it's really the content that you are describing this way. You could also do this by as we do it here, having the parameter content, and then within that parameter, the model sequence as we had it on the previous slide. That would have the advantage that we could also use the same mechanism for other parameters beside content. And mostly, of course, parameters are strings, and then that's not that relevant. But in some cases, for instance, in the source parameter for the citation behavior or the title behavior for figure, you could very well imagine that you want some markup that you could create using models within the parameter. I think there are a number of cases where this nested behavior is useful. When we want to create new content, so that's new content that's not in the XML, now in TEI Publisher, that's often created in CSS using the before and after pseudo elements, but that's obviously very, very limited. Also in cases like you have a page break that you want to turn into a link, but that link should also be an image. Or a paragraph that needs a paragraph number in a margin, a pop-up. You'll encounter a case later in the talk. So I think there are many cases where this nesting of model elements is useful. And my experience is that once you begin to use it, yes, you really begin to use it everywhere. It's, to my mind, it would be incredibly useful. Then there's another aspect that I want to discuss, and that's not so much an extension of the model as reorganizing the definitions. As you know, we currently have an ODD structure, and in the ODD structure, we have a schema specification, and in the schema specification, we have element specifications, and in the element specifications, we have models for the elements. And I think this is an unfortunate choice for a number of reasons. First of all, the expected processing will never be part of a schema because that's not what schemas are for. So why make it part of schema specification? Magdalena will know this, maybe she can answer in the discussion. I assume that the idea was we want everything in the ODD, which is after all the one document that does it all. And as the behavior seems related to elements, it might seem useful to have them in the schema specifications and under the element specification. I believe there is a better way to achieve these same objectives. There are also more pressing and practical reasons, but I think that for theoretical reasons, it would already be more sound to have a structure like on this slide, that we define as a sister element to schema specification, let's say schema proc or schema processing. And within that schema processing, we could still have element by element, an element processing, and within that element processing, still the same behaviors as we now have in the element specification. I think, in fact, this structure is theoretically better, but still severely limited. And that is because it still assumes that all of the behavior, all of the processing has to be defined at element level. And I think that very often you have sorts of behavior where the processing of multiple elements depends on each other and on the context, and that leads to large number of models within the element specification with parameters that have to be whose value is tested in the predicate. And I think this can be done more cleanly. So, for instance, if I would want here the list person to be rendered as a table and the person to be rendered as a row in that table, the way we would have to do this now is to have the behavior twice. You would have a behavior on the table. Say I want the list person in the back to be rendered as a table. Then that predicate should also be present on the row. And I think that's a small example of what you really don't want to have. So what I want to propose as or suggest that would be a useful structure is to have this schema processing element. Then within the schema processing element, a structure of processing blocks. And the processing blocks, there should be a processing block with processing mode default. And there we gather all of the elements that are now present in the element specification, but there should also processing blocks that have XML IDs and that can be activated using that ID. And in those processing blocks, we can collect related definitions of processing for elements that is useful in a certain context. And as an example, I want to show this. In the TEI Publisher Shakespeare demo, we have this PBView element, and it's displaying the title in the document. And the way it is activated is using this parameter mode with value title. And then when we go to the ODD, there's a predicate, and it asks, is there a parameter with value, is there a mode parameter with value with title? Okay, that's true. And in that case, we are going to create this heading behavior. Now, this works, of course, but it strikes me as a really indirect way of accomplishing what you want. After all, in this context, we want to execute this piece of code. We always execute this piece of code. There shouldn't be a need to evaluate a parameter. So what I think would be good to have is a way to say in the PBView element a proc block attribute with title mode, and the proc block, that title mode is the XML ID of a proc block in the ODD, and then in the proc block it says behavior heading, exactly the same as it was in the other ODD. I think that's really straightforward. It also removes some of the clutter in the element spec for title statement in the ODD. and it removes the need to have this procedural element, the parameter, in this context. And we'll see other examples of why we need these callable modules when we think about interaction between multiple processing models, which is something that I also want to talk about. This is based on the thinking in from another project that we have at Huygens. Maybe some of you have heard people present about the Editum project, and the idea of the Editum project is that, or one of the ideas is that editions consists of components. That components should be reusable. That components consists of data and functionality, and that the data of a component should be handled by the functionality belonging to that component, and that components must be able to interact. So it's moving a bit towards an object-oriented ID. This sounds pretty apodictic, but I'm going to show you in the context of the Mondrian edition that we are working on also at Huygens, what I mean by that. So obviously, this is an edition of the letters and papers of Piet Mondrian. Here we have the letter component. Another component is the introductory texts. There is a component which is the artworks. Here we don't already see much interaction between the various components, but we'll see that on the next slide. By the way, this is the edition as it has been programmed by Gijs-Jan Brouwer. This is not the edition that I'm experimenting with. Yes, I am experimenting with this edition in the sense that I try to emulate its features, but this is created using other techniques. Here in the letter display, we see a number of interactions between the letter component and the artwork component. First of all, we see an artwork side panel, and we also see an artwork pop-up when a reference to an artwork is in the text. And my contention is that the data for this pop-up and for the side panel should be created by the artwork component and made available to the letter component. Similarly, for the person component, also a pop-up and side panel. And the way I think this could be done is this. So in the XML, we have an RS element of type person with a ref attribute, which points to an entry in the biography file. What we could have in the letter ODD is an element proc or element spec, or however it's called, for the RS element. Model predicate is person, behavior is pop-up, and this creates a container that contains both the text that has the pop-up and the pop-up. Then within the model, here, nested model again, we have a model sequence. First of all, we get in line the text that has the pop-up, and then there comes a block which will contain the pop-up, and within that block, there is a behavior which is new. I called it switch SPM, and SPM here means schema processing model, and it gives the name of the schema processing model and the proc block. And this, by the way, might just be normal processing model parameters, I think. And it gives a parameter content, and the value of that is tokenized ref, because there can be multiple values in this ref attribute. So then in the person auth, in the biography auth, we have a proc block, or in the experiments I'm calling it a property, which has that name, prop bio pop-up, and that contains the processing of the person element, and well, it has a block, and that gives a number of pieces of information, what you want to do, what the information that you want to provide for that person. Similar things you could even have within a single component. What we see here, for instance, is a link to a letter from an introductory component. This pop-up, of course, has to come from the letter component, because if it would be generated by the introductory component would have to know about the data of the letter component, and it would have to be modified each time that you are going to use it in combination with different content. So this text is generated by a property or a processing block within the letter component. And of course, when you have that, you can also use it within the letter component. So here there's a link to the next letter, and here the same processing block could be used again if this site were programmed in that way. The last thing that I want to discuss today is this overriding issue. As you know, we have the possibility to chain ODDs using the source attribute on schema specification. And then there is usually, certainly in TEI Publisher, one ODD that contains all the default definitions that are usually necessary. And we have an ODD for our project, which contains the few elements that we want to override. Now, we have an element specification both in the in our own ODD and in the ODD that we point to. And then what the guidelines say, that element specification will have mode change, and mode change implies process unidentifiable children in replace mode. And that means the model elements are unidentifiable children, that these are thrown away from the ODD that you point to, and therefore you have to take over all of the models that were in the source ODD in your own ODD as soon as you start modifying the behavior of an element. But I think if you begin to think in terms of objects and properties or methods, a specialization of an object should always take over the behavior of its parent object and really only define the specific properties that are necessary for that object. It should always reuse the useful content from that parent. And so I think that the element procs or element specs in the default proc block should have mode is concat. So they should be concatenated, and the mode is concat doesn't exist at present. So I think that should be introduced. And so how this would work would then be we would have in our own ODD, for instance, let's say the choice element. In the general ODD, there is 3 models: SIG and core, abbreviation and expansion, and original and regularization. Say we want to override just the SIG and core behavior, then I shouldn't be obliged to repeat also the these 2 models. What should occur if we have this mode concat is that just the model from my specification is concatenated with the model from the default specification. So you get a specification with 4 models. And then the second model, of course, will never be used because it has the same predicate as the model that I have introduced. Or maybe it will be used if my predicate is slightly more specific. Say SIG and core in the context of the back element rather than in the body element. And I think that in that way, processing will be much more clean. It will, it's less error prone, having to no longer having to copy statements around. And therefore, I think it should be better. I want to do a very brief demo, which is really just showing that this can actually be made to work. I want to show you first, and if it's okay, you are seeing now a piece of my XML. This is the edition publication model, which I use, which defines the edition, and it starts, for instance, with saying, okay, this is the content of the edition. And you see here that I have the introduction and another introductory text and bibliography, biography, artworks, and a folder that contains the letters. And each of these content elements points to schema processing model, the intro, the biblio list, bio list, artwork list, and the Mondrian letter. And these processing models are defined below, and these are the files. And they are, of course, they can be concatenated. So the intro file points to the generic file, and the biblio file points to the generic file. And for the letters, we even have a Mondrian letter, which points to the letters, and then the letters points to the generic. So it's a complicated chain structure, but using that structure, we can create something like this. You should be seeing now a simple web page, and it's obviously not optimized for usability or user friendliness. It's just to show that it can be done. We have these introductory texts, etc. We have a bibliography, biography, artworks. But the interesting thing is that we have the letters, and within the letters, we can go to a letter. We have references to persons, and then when we have a reference to person, we see this pop-up appear. So what happens here is actually that the letter ODD, or the letter processing model, transfers control to the person processing model in order to collect that information from the biography XML. Similarly, the artwork ODD generates the information for the pop-up in the artwork pop-up, and the same happens in these panels for the persons and the artwork. So this too is generated from the artwork ODD and the persons ODD. So there are some other things that I encountered in working with the processing model, but I think for now this is enough. I think the processing model is really an essential ingredient in a declarative specification of edition output. But what I have seen, as I mentioned, is I think also useful outside of that context. What I think would be useful is to have nested models or models within parameters in the processing model, and to be able to transfer control in order to achieve more modularity and more independent components, and then to reorganize the way the processing model is now stored in the ODD, lift the processing model out of the schema definition, and create these callable modules. It would be possible to not do this completely. It would, for instance, be possible to keep the default processing within the element spec, but still create processing blocks also either within the schema specification or in a separate schema processing module, rather than go all the way. But I think the cleanest way would be to introduce this processing schema processing elements, and then I think it would be useful to be able to do overriding at model level rather than at element specification level. If you are interested in this project, you're welcome to look at it, and maybe even if you're interested in working with me on this, I would very much appreciate interest from other people in this. And that's what I wanted to tell you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Peter.